past. You know, I have this paper that I've been working on, and you can see from the title of it, it's not quite finished, and so I wanted to really talk about this project that I'm working on, translating Andal. And those of you that don't know what bhakti means, right, in Sanskrit, bhakti means kind of devotion. It's a form of poetry that particularly found a wonderful embodiment in South India, where you had poets oftentimes writing from the vantage point of a gopi or a shepherdess girl, writing these love songs to Krishna. And oftentimes the absent divine is addressed as a lover might be. And so there's this kind of a very impassioned, ecstatic sense, and even a sensual sense of the relationship that one has to the divine. And there's this wonderful tradition. So I just wanted to tell you, some of you might not know Andal. She's a 8th century Tamil poet saint, the only female Alvar saint of the 12. And I've been working on this book with a wonderful poet, Priya Sarupya Chabria. And Andal was actually a foundling. So she was raised in a temple in Sri Villipatur, which is a small town in South India, and eventually became both a teenage poet and then a goddess. And so the kind of wonderful thing about Andal is the work that we have was all composed by her before the age of 13. At which point no one knows what happened to her. They think she kind of apocryphally disappeared and merged into Godhead. And you know, in South India there are performative interpretations of Andal's life and all surrounding love and passionate piety, or enacted in Chennai during an annual music and dance festival, and also in films and popular television dramas. Dingy roadside photo studios exhibit saturated images of girls in their coming-of-age ceremony, dressed as Andal in vibrant silk saris, flower garlands, their hair dressed in a small bun. The iconographical images of Andal is a kind of a constant. And her father also was one of the Alvar saints, and he would be the one to prepare the pujas and the ceremonies. And what Andal did, which was really considered really bad behavior, is she went and would take these garlands and put them on herself, right? And her father was very upset. How dare she, desecrate what's meant to be pure? And then he had a dream that and in fact, Vishnu said he prefers the garlands once Andal has worn them because of her love and devotion. And so this is she's a really interesting figure and also kind of subversive and transgressive in her way. And in a lot of South Indian weddings, they still recite parts of the Tirupavai, which is a long poem, the path to Krishna, you might interpret it as. But she also has this other body of work, which we worked on translating, called the Natya Tirumolai. And in this, and it's been whitewashed a little bit, I think, but the actual language in the Chentamil is really impassioned. And she actually talks about the need for joining physically and emotionally with her chosen God. And similar to the Gnostic texts, which were omitted from the Bible, right, because they had more overt sexual symbolism and heterodoxy, which verged on the heretical, many of Andal's hymns are also kind of transgressive, and they're cast out from the official version of her life. I wanted to say, so in her work, Andal calls to Vishnu, the pervader, as a cohesive principle of sattva, or supreme illumination. And she calls him by many other names and addresses him variously as Narayana, who moves on casual waters on the serpent, Sashkana as Narayana Nampi, as Turumala, or Turumula, the dark one of Tamil theology, and he, of course, Vishnu had 10 prominent avatars, which she addresses all of them. But most frequently, she addresses him as Krishna, as the divine child, and as the lover. And each of Andal's pasurams, or songs, are drenched in the way the sacred is embedded in every material that constitutes ephemeral life. And at the same time, she summons timeless grace to illuminate her work. And her work calls to question all markers of identity and boundary, and she passionately sings for bliss to enter her body and spirit. And we want to keep her youthfulness in mind as well when she was receiving Andal. Because of the really complicated, radical, and erotic content of her verses, some people have conjectured that she might have, in fact, never existed and been simply an imaginative construct of her father. And of course, we don't have records, so there's no way of really knowing, right, what the actual history of her figure is. And yet, we actually refrain from using that term transgressive to Andal because it suggests a deliberate breaking of rules. We think that she didn't bother with any social conventions or rules except for poetry, except for this kind of lyric union. Did she actually exist? Was she a figment of her father, Perry Alvar's imagination, a pseudonym, a female identity he assumed to translate his love fantasy of God? Does it in fact matter? Because we have the poems, and there is this issue of gender bending that male bhakti saints oftentimes assume female identities in order to temporarily relinquish power in patriarchal societies and then thereby surrender more fully to the divine. And so there's been this kind of controversy that's raged over the centuries. And I think part of it is slightly misogynist, right? How could a young girl possess such knowledge of the gods and their attributes and master this difficult form and write with such elegance and grace? And so many people said, it's not possible. How could she have done that? And, ultimately, though, her work is drenched in complexities of every kind of wordplay, nuance, contradiction, and kind of poetic brilliance, and they're much different than her own father's pillais, right? They're actually, in form and content, very different than what her father was said to have composed. And is she a poet or saint? She's neither, she's both. She abides in the great mystery of cosmos by being fully present in her body. She's a teenage girl who would take no mortal man for her betrothed and merge into Godhead. She's a dutiful daughter as well as God's playmate and lover, and she collapses distinctions and ultimately exists as a poet divine. Her songs passed on to us are an embodiment of a wholly immersive passion that continue to enchant us today. Now, as she sings in part of this, he, the God of my gods, my love, clasps me close, clasps my waist, caresses me with his touch divine. He ravishes me, but I don't know where he is. And we don't know where Andal is either, but we know many centuries later that we continue to be caressed and ravished by her. And so this book will be coming out with Zuban Books in India in the fall. The University of Chicago Press will be distributing it. So it's called The Autobiography of a Goddess. And I think she really illuminates this notion of bhakti and a kind of erotic and supremely spiritual relationship to the divine. So thank you all. Let's pass from the